Welcome. It's time to settle down. Dim the lights, relax, and just listen. Let the rain outside, or maybe the quiet inside, set the mood. We have an hour of unsettling tales ahead, stories gathered from the shadows. Make sure you're comfortable. Our first story starts now. You drive long enough, the asphalt starts to whisper back. Not the engine's thrum, not the tire's song. The road itself feels like it's thinking, breathing under your wheels. Like it knows you, remembers you.
3:17 Uhr nachts.
10 hours since I'd pulled my rig out of the Phoenix distribution yard, hauling a consignment of high-end electronics no one really needed, just moving from one sterile warehouse to another. Somewhere on US 93, deep in Nevada, heading north towards nothing much. The lines on the map in my head had softened, edges blurred like old watercolor left in the sun. The radio had surrendered to a torrent of static around one. I kept it crackling anyway. It was a kind of company, a reminder that somewhere, beyond this bubble of light my headlights punched into the desert night, other signals existed, other people. I'd been scanning for a truck stop, any sign of life, for what felt like the last 2 hours. Either I drifted through one in a trance, or it was another phantom on the atlas. Wouldn't be the first time the highway conjured an oasis only to snatch it away. When the faint, distant glow of a sign finally materialized through the heat haze rising from the cooling asphalt, I almost missed the turnoff. Wrenched the wheel hard, the rig groaning onto the dusty access ramp like its life, and mine, depended on it. The sign, a battered metal rectangle, proclaimed Oasis Fuel ATS in faded, peeling paint. But the building behind it was dark, no welcoming lights from the windows. I parked beside one of the ancient-looking pumps. No other vehicles, just my 18-wheeler and the long, distorted shadow it cast in the weak moonlight. The overhead lights above the pumps flickered erratically, emitting a high-pitched, electrical whine that vibrated in my fillings. The desert wind, usually a constant presence, was eerily still here. The door to the station store side opened as if on its own accord. I stepped inside. No one. No clerk behind the chipped Formica counter. No music.
No welcoming chime.
Just the cloying scent of industrial cleaner and something else beneath it. Something old and metallic, like rust and dried blood. Anybody here? My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the silence. No answer. I needed the restroom. It was towards the back, past a dusty rack of sun-bleached postcards and bags of jerky that looked petrified. The door, marked with a faded, genderless stick figure, creaked open with a reluctance that felt almost human. Inside, a single fluorescent tube spasmed on the ceiling, a manic, buzzing strobe that made the grimy porcelain fixtures seem to jump and stutter, glitching, like the world was trying to buffer. One of the 2 stall doors was closed, and from behind it someone was humming. Low, slow, deeply off-key, and the strangest, coldest thing, I knew the melody, but I couldn't place it, couldn't grasp how or why it was familiar. The bathroom was at the back of the small building, past a shelf of sunglasses that looked like they'd been there since the 70s and petrified-looking meat snacks. The door groaned open as if reluctant to admit me. Inside, the single fluorescent light above the cracked mirror was having a seizure, buzzing erratically, then stuttering into near darkness, then flaring again. It was like watching a failing EKG. One of the 2 stalls was shut, and someone inside was humming, a low, slow, discordant tune. And the most unsettling part, I recognized the melody, but I couldn't fathom from where. The restroom was in the rear, beyond a display of sunglasses so old they might have been fashionable twice and jerky that appeared to have fossilized. The door opened with a groan, as if it resisted entry. Inside, the lone fluorescent fixture above the cracked mirror was spasming, buzzing violently, then stuttering into semi-darkness, then flaring up again. It made the grimy space feel as if it were caught in a failing projector. One of the 2 stalls was closed, and from within there was humming, low, unhurried, and jarringly out of tune. And the most peculiar, chilling thing, I knew that tune, but I couldn't recall how. The stall was at the back, beyond a rack of sunglasses that looked like props from a bygone era and meat sticks that appeared to have mummified. The door protested with a groan when I pushed it open. Inside, the single fluorescent light above the chipped basin was in its death throes, buzzing erratically, then faltering into near blackness, then flaring with renewed, desperate effort. It gave the cramped, unclean space the feel of a failing electrical system on the verge of collapse. One of the two stall doors was closed, and from behind that door, someone was humming, a low, slow, and unsettlingly off-key melody. And strangest of all, I knew the tune. But for the life of me, I couldn't remember where I'd heard it. It wasn't the humming itself that disturbed me so profoundly. It was the song. It sounded like a distorted version of Wayfaring Stranger, that old, mournful folk song my grandfather used to play on his harmonica on quiet evenings, back before his mind started to wander. Except this rendition was wrong. The notes were bent, sour, like someone trying to reconstruct it from a fragmented, corrupted memory. The longer I listened, the more unsettling it became, as if the tune itself was a parasite humming me. I tapped on the stall door. Silence at first, then, "Be out in a moment." The voice sounded like mine, not just similar, identical, down to the slight rasp from too many hours of road dust and black coffee. I swallowed something acrid and waited, pretending to check messages on my phone with fingers that trembled uncontrollably. The humming stopped. Then the stall door creaked open. He stepped out, denim jacket, frayed at the cuffs, faded baseball cap pulled low. Same exhausted lines etched around eyes I saw reflected in every grimy truck stop mirror from Barstow to Cheyenne. It was me, not a passing resemblance, it was me. Except his hands were shaking violently, and his face, it held an expression of profound, almost beatific relief. "Oh, thank heavens," he said, his voice a low murmur. "You found this place too, then?" I took an involuntary step back, my heel hitting the edge of the sink. "What in the blazes is this?" I managed, though it came out as a strangled whisper. He smiled, not a creepy smile, a genuinely relieved one. "I thought it was only me," he said, stuck, but I guess it wasn't. Not really. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, like someone jolted awake from a deep, disturbing dream, unsure if they wanted to return to it. He stepped forward, raised a hand my hand, and reached for my shoulder, as if to steady himself, or to pull me into whatever abyss he'd crawled out of. I didn't wait to find out. I shoved him back, harder than I intended. He stumbled, hitting the stall door with a dull thud, a strange look of resignation on his face, as if he'd done this before, as if this scene had already been enacted countless times. I bolted, didn't look back, didn't want to see what expression he wore as I fled. I slammed the restroom door open so hard it bounced off the peeling wall. Cold desert air hit me like a physical blow. But something was wrong. The lot wasn't the same. The pumps were a different color, a sickly pale yellow instead of the deep, rusted green the first remembered from moments before. The flickering sign above the station building didn't say Oasis Fuel ATS anymore. It was a blank, white sign with crudely painted black block letters. "Welcome, no price for gas. No familiar logo." And my rig, my Peterbilt, it wasn't mine. Same model, yes. Same distinctive chrome grille. Same small dent on the passenger side fender from that incident in Flagstaff. But the decal on the door was different. A stylized raven in flight, above the words Nomad Freightways. Never worked for them. Never even heard of them. The cab door was unlocked. My boots clanged on the metal step like hammer blows in the sudden silence. Inside, the CB radio was on, crackling with static. I don't remember turning it on, but it was on. And from the speaker, or maybe from somewhere underneath it, came that same broken, off-key melody. Low, tinny, distorted. There was a small, framed photograph tucked into the sun visor. My old Labrador Buster as a puppy. But he wasn't a puppy in this photo. He looked ancient, grizzled, his eyes clouded. And then, as I stared, the image seemed to shift, superimposing the puppy image over the old one, then back again like a corrupted digital file. Like memory itself was misfiled, unstable. I turned to the small, circular mirror clipped above the dashboard, checked my face, looked fine, tired, lips chapped from the dry air. Still me. But then the reflection blinked. I stared back. We held each other's gaze like that, me and the thing pretending to be me in the glass, for maybe 3 full, heart-stopping seconds. Then I heard it, the humming again, but this time it wasn't from the radio. It was behind me, right behind my seat. I twisted around fast. The sleeper cab was empty. Just my duffel bag, my battered coffee thermos, my logbook. But when I looked back at the mirror, he was there. The other me, only not. Paler, eyes brighter, lit with a feverish intensity, like he hadn't slept in weeks and thrived on it. Mouth curled into a knowing, almost triumphant smirk. He mouthed something, 2 words I could read clearly on his lips. Still here? That's when I knew I wasn't going to make it to sunrise on this road. I drove, didn't think, just gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles ached, as if it were the only thing tethering me to sanity. The highway stretched out, an endless black ribbon under a starless sky, but it stopped making sense. Signs began to repeat. Rest area 10 miles. Then, 5 minutes later, rest area 10 miles. Again. And again, the same faded, peeling billboard for a long-defunct roadside zoo in Arizona, even though I was supposed to be heading into the Rockies. I passed a diner with a distinctive neon sign, a winking cowboy that I was sure I'd passed 3 states ago. Same flickering lights, same battered pickup truck parked out front. Even, I swore, the same couple arguing heatedly in a window booth. Nothing was linear anymore. Everything looped, folded back on itself. Hours passed, or minutes, or maybe days. Time became elastic, meaningless. Eventually, through the haze of exhaustion and dread, I saw lights again. Another roadside stop. Different sign this time, barely legible. Haven. Looked cleaner than the others. Newer, almost normal. I pulled in, not out of hope, just numb resignation. The restroom was brighter, cleaner, soap in the dispenser. I splashed cold water on my face, watched it drip into the porcelain basin, took a long, shuddering breath. Then I looked up into the mirror. He was still there, my reflection, not humming now, just smiling. Faint, patient, knowing smile, like he'd already climbed inside my skin, like he was just waiting for some final signal. And I think I know what it is. I'm terrified to fall asleep in the cab tonight, 'cause I think that's what he's waiting for, that final surrender. The drive back from my grandfather's place in southern Utah was long, cutting across desolate stretches of highway. We'd stopped at a dusty roadside antique fair near Ely, a sprawling collection of stalls under the brutal Nevada sun. Grandpa collected old tools and scientific instruments, while he haggled over a rusty sextant. My eyes, restlessly scanning a table laden with tarnished silver and forgotten trinkets, fell upon a small, heavy brass object. It was an astrolabe or something very much like it. Intricate, interlocking discs covered in strange symbols and celestial charts I didn't recognize. It felt strangely cold to the touch, despite the desert heat. Something about it called to me. It was cheap. I bought it, tucking it into my backpack, largely forgetting about it. That was months ago. Now, hauling a load of medical supplies towards Denver, the memory surfaced as my music cut out due to poor signal on this godforsaken stretch of highway, the one I'd rerouted to avoid a reported chemical spill further north. This road felt older, less traveled, The silence after the music died was profound. Maybe an hour into this detour, the restlessness from too little sleep the night before, coupled with the lingering unease from that first oasis stop encounter weeks ago, had my eyelids feeling like lead. Hope flared briefly when I passed a large, faded red sign. Oasis stop, fuel and EATS, 2 miles. My heart sank. That sign. I remembered it now. If I'd actually scanned the battered rectangle properly that first time, some primal part of my brain might have connected the dots sooner. Pulling in, I searched the spaces. Empty again. Stretching, I tried to shake off the déjà vu. This station being remote, the lack of other vehicles wasn't initially alarming. The building looked a little more run down than I remembered, but maybe that was just my memory. It was fairly small, for pumps, a few parking spots lining a weathered wooden fence, all overshadowed by dark, silent pines that crowded too close. Sitting in the silent cab, my mind registered the absence of the watch's soft tick. Grandpa had supposedly fixed it, put in a new battery, but it was dead again. Reaching into my backpack on the passenger seat for my wallet, my hand brushed against the cold metal of the astrolabe I'd forgotten I'd packed. Pulled it out. The intricate brass dials seemed to gleam faintly in the dim cab light. Strange. Part of me wanted to unbuckle its small leather strap, examine its complex gears. But the rational side urged me towards the red and white station building for caffeine. As I was about to switch off the engine, a figure shuffled past my truck, heading towards the station door. A woman, youngish, pushing a light blue stroller. The image felt eerily, unpleasantly familiar. Refocusing on my immediate need, I traded the astrolabe for my wallet and followed. Entering through the grimy glass doors, I was met by the same stale, sweetish chemical aroma. With a specific energy drink in mind, I made a beeline for the coolers, passing the woman. She was studying a bag of chips, the stroller parked beside her. Apart from us, the only other person was a cashier, this time a young woman with dark, Gothic-style makeup and multiple piercings, looking utterly bored. Avoiding prolonged eye contact, I grabbed my drink. As I deliberated over a snack, another person entered, the door chime announcing his arrival. Too engrossed in my choice, I didn't look up until a balding man, reeking of stale cigarettes and something acrid like gasoline, planted himself uncomfortably close, also scanning the shelves. His proximity, the foul smell, made me lightheaded. I grabbed a random packet of crackers and moved quickly to the counter. Every step I took, I felt his eyes on me. I didn't turn fully, but in my periphery, he remained in the same spot, staring. With all the hairs on my neck prickling, I awkwardly paid, mumbled a thanks to the cashier, and hastened out. Reaching the relative safety of my truck, my body sagged with relief. Cracking open the energy drink, I scanned the parking lot. My truck was the only vehicle. How had those three, the mother, the cashier, the balding man, gotten here? No cars, no houses nearby, just miles of empty highway and desert scrub. That awkwardness was instantly replaced by a small, cold well of confused fear. My mind knew something was wrong, even if my senses couldn't pinpoint it. Not wanting to linger, I buckled up and pulled out, determined to make good time. I'd been back on the road for at least an hour, maybe more, subconsciously counting the few cars that passed. Initially, they'd whizzed by every few minutes. Now, the road was utterly empty. I didn't think I'd seen another vehicle since leaving that last oasis stop. The energy drink had worn off, and my bladder was protesting. Excellent timing, another sign. Oasis stop, 2 miles. Again, pulling in, pick of the bays once more. Parking in the same spot as before, my body tensed as I reached for the door handle. Just as I switched off the engine, a shadow crossed my driver's side window. The young mother with the light blue stroller was making her way towards the station door. It was too close a call. I waited until she was inside, then reluctantly entered, heading straight for the restroom, passing the same bored-looking Gothic cashier. This time, I paid more attention to the layout. It was identical to the first Oasis stop, the one with my doppelganger. Breaking the seal I'd held for what felt like an age. A faint chime from the front of the store was quickly masked as I flushed and left the stall. Making my way back to the main floor, I almost collided with the balding man, standing motionless just inches from the restroom door. Apologizing, I sidestepped him quickly, keeping my head down, and shuffled towards the coolers, making the opposite drink choice from before. Paying, offering another awkward smile and thanks to the cashier. That pit in my stomach deepened. Unsure why, my natural instinct was to check over my shoulder as I pushed open the station door. My head turned, and my eyes locked with the balding man, still standing motionless by the restroom door. Had he followed me from the first place? Or was this a twin? Even from that distance, I could see deep into his dilated pupils, feel that same disturbing sensation of being evaluated, triggering my freeze response. Time stood still as he watched me attempt to rationalize his recurring presence. Suddenly, his body twisted with a mechanically fluid motion, and he strode towards me, gliding down the aisle with no apparent effort. Panic erupted. Without thinking, my body was dragging me back to my truck. Half tripping as I dropped from the curb, my eyes were fixed on the station door. Some small part of my mind tried to justify his actions, but the primal portion overpowered it, screaming one order: run. Flying into the driver's seat and flooring it out of the parking lot. My eyes were still locked on the entrance as he burst forth, his gaze sweeping the now vacant concrete. As our eyes met again, his were almost gleeful, his otherwise blank expression tracing my acceleration back onto the minimal safety of the highway. I was done. Who knew how long this road was, how much further it stretched? I needed to go back. You're always told to keep your eyes on the road. Sensible advice. But those words didn't register as I hysterically scanned every vaguely human-shaped shadow among the Joshua trees on either side of the desolate highway. It wasn't like I could hit another vehicle. Mine seemed to be the only one inhabiting this endless stretch. Interspersed between my wild glances, I caught myself subtly examining the road ahead. For a couple of minutes, it was flat, expressionless gray. Then I hit a large bump. Checking my rear view, it seemed the concrete itself had bulged upwards, like a buried pillar, not a speed bump. Why would a highway out here even have speed bumps? That single instance quickly became three. Then for each rising higher, some now jagged columns as tall as my cab, forcing me to swerve violently to avoid collision. Hitting the brakes, almost giving myself whiplash, I stopped inches from a spire-like cylinder of concrete that pierced the sky above. Whatever force was at play here definitely didn't want me turning back. With the countless new roadblocks, moving forward seemed impossible too. But checking my rear view again offered a sliver of perverse logic to this minefield. The road I'd just perilously traversed, the section behind me, was now as flat and bleak as it had been before the pillars erupted, in stark contrast to the impassable chaos ahead. Making the only decision I could, I executed a tight U-turn, the rig groaning in protest, and headed back, deeper into this road's unassuming, treacherous facade. Passing that same Oasis stop sign again, 2 miles. I couldn't tell if it was the road spitting out another slowly degrading copy or if it was, in fact, the same one I'd just been chased from. It didn't matter. My only goal now was an exit. Any exit from this looping nightmare. Turning what felt like the only real corner in an hour. Though my hysterics made timekeeping impossible, my mind paused as my eyes traced up a tall, weathered red sign. Oasis stop, now entering. Hoping, praying I'd just hallucinated the previous instances due to exhaustion. I begged my eyes to show me anything other than that same building as its shape came into view between the sparse, twisted Joshua trees. An identical structure emerged, offset only by its overtly decrepit nature. Unlike the previous stations, this one was undeniably abandoned, neglected for decades, instilling a vividly sharp paranoia of crossing a threshold from which there'd be no return. Slowing to a crawl, the parking area was devoid of vehicles. The stained concrete around the pumps, coupled with speckled mold patches, would have surely put off any normal person, if any still existed out here. Half my mind questioned if I was just misremembering minor details, if all remote desert stations just happened to look similar. That rational half was quickly bypassed by the sudden emergence of a person. Striding into view from a gap between a slanted, rotten wooden fence and a rusted tire pressure pump was the woman. Alarm bells screamed as her appearance was unmistakably identical to the lady I'd encountered hours, or was it days, ago. Something about her walk was off. The slight limp was more pronounced now, her reliance on the stroller absolute, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. She looked tired, ancient. Each step was labored. Still, with my gaze fixed on her, I mounted the broken curb with a jarring scrape, cursing under my breath. Surprisingly, on this remote stretch, with my truck undoubtedly overlaying any ambient desert sounds, she didn't so much as flinch or look my way. Whatever commotion I made seemingly never reached her ears, or, more accurately, didn't elicit any deviation from her current, singular path. Stopping and assessing the damage, scratched alloys, scuffed passenger side wheel, I felt a wave of despair. With enough occupying my mind already, this just sank to the bottom of a well of issues I had no interest in fixing. Still crouching, wiping the sweat from my brow, I again felt those eyes on me. Standing and scanning the lifeless parking spaces, there was no one and nothing in my immediate view. Those same malicious beams only sought to reaffirm their owner's animosity. Expecting to find myself face to face with them the moment I'd stood up, I still couldn't put a form to that feeling as I tried to focus on what was currently pressing. Re-entering my truck and starting the ignition, hoping to get off this cursed loop, my pulse slowly relaxed, back to a baseline, leaving an empty pit in its wake. Keeping my head trained on that building's perimeter as I passed, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, other than its extreme state of decay. Leaving that scene behind, I permitted myself a final, hesitant check of my rearview mirror to finally, fully settle my nerves. Seeing only the back of the dilapidated building and the road's desolate scrubland perimeter, I was mere milliseconds away from refocusing on the road ahead, when an all-too-familiar figure lurched from the shimmering heat haze opposite the station. The balding man. He simply smiled as the distance between us crumbled away in the mirror, leaving his visage burned into my mind. We were merely a breath apart. If he'd willed it so, I'd have found out why he was infusing me with a fear tantamount to a trapped coyote facing a circling vulture. The day was beginning to fade as I could faintly see my truck's headlights beaming down on the road ahead. With them springing to life, my own eyes had started to waver. Who knows how long I'd been driving, but that incessant orange fuel light had been warning me of an impending stall for what felt like an eternity. Just my luck, a lone red sign, identical to the others, peeking from between two skeletal, dead Joshua trees. Oasis stop, 2 miles. 2 miles until I'd see him again. The balding man, or his decaying counterpart. I didn't want to stop, didn't even want to drop my speed below 30, though without any fuel, I'd soon be walking. I don't even recall how many miles I had in the tank before embarking on this trip or what time, what day I left, but I could feel I'd been driving for a heck of a lot longer than my satellite navigation, now blank, had ever suggested possible. Like a grain of sand atop a dune, those thoughts were blowing away as the building came into view. Decrepit was too kind a word. Peeling paint, loose siding tiles, some of which had already crumbled to the now mossy and overgrown concrete drive, painted a picture of utter neglect. Most of the windows were smashed or boarded up, with a litter of small glass shards pooling at the main entrance. Even a small section of the roof had seemingly collapsed, the building itself sagging heavily to one side. I'd have assumed it was long abandoned if not for a shape trudging slowly within its innards. Reaching a stop to ascertain who or what was still accessing that husk, there she was, emerging from my right as she had the countless times I'd visited these cursed mirages. As the station had decayed, she too was deteriorating. Limping from between the now rotten and collapsed fence sections, she held onto that now bent and disjointed stroller as if it were part of her, and from my angle, she might as well have been. Dragging what seemed to be her bruised and mangled right leg, she stared forward through barely open, clouded eyes. Her one and only continuous goal, to reach an unknown ending within that ruin. Silently watching my body, as it had when she passed my truck previously, fixed me in place as it wrestled with the idea of attempting to offer assistance versus succumbing to the primal urge to flee. The small, tarnished brass astrolabe lay on the passenger seat, its dials still, hesitantly checking all corners of the parking lot, the shattered windows of the station, and the darkening gaps between each tall, skeletal tree from within my vaguely safe cocoon. I mustered all the remaining courage I had. My hand strayed to the astrolabe. To my shock and amazement, the pump, though rusted and leaning, still seemed connected. The dial didn't flicker to life, but I heard the faint gurgle of liquid as I inserted the nozzle. Though the handle was stiff, I managed to get a flow. Keeping tabs on my surroundings, I filled up on whatever dregs that pump had left, saying a silent prayer that this would be enough to get me to somewhere else. Anywhere else. For a moment I was prepared to climb back into the truck and flee, but some morbid curiosity, some desperate need for an answer, even a terrible one, made me step towards the shattered doorway of the station building. I'm thankful I didn't take too long to collect my thoughts, as only a couple of steps from my truck, a panel from the station's sagging overhead cover came crashing down onto my passenger side door with a deafening shriek of tortured metal. Smashing the window and taking my wing mirror was far better than taking me out. With that depressing thought, I pressed on into the dying building. Its interior, though a shadowy echo of the building's previous iterations, was only slightly altered by the cascade of fallen shelves, roof panels, and part of a collapsed wall that now lay scattered across the broken, dusty tiles. Weeds pushed up through cracks in the concrete. The air was thick with the smell of decay, dust, and something else, that faint, metallic, coppery scent from the very first encounter. The lady, or what was left of her, still leaning against her battered stroller, threatening to meld with it, stood motionless beside a toppled shelf. Worn packaging and surrounding debris covered her feet, but I could make out a faded Lay's logo from a packet her vacant gaze was fixed upon. In a similar manner, each shelf, once adorned with a selection of snacks and drinks, now lay bare or broken. Some small remnants had collapsed to the cold tiles, the crumbling facade of this place ever having been used by any actual person only now dawning on me with full force. Walking over to the counter, I expected to see the Gothic cashier, or her equivalent in this decayed iteration. With everything that had been happening, I'd almost forgotten about her, but she wasn't visible through the dirty, cracked plastic hygiene screen. Not wanting to touch the eons of grime clinging to its surface, I peered closer. The same rusty metal containers and haphazard selection of debris, shelves, and part of the wall covered the floor, though in amongst those was another shape. Lying face down, I could make out the form of a person. By the tattered remains of a green apron and a shock of black hair matted with dust and something darker, I could tell who it was. Although part of me wanted to jump the counter and check, I knew I was far too late to offer any help. Her twisted body was mashed with the broken chair she'd likely been sitting in each time I'd sauntered over to pay. Her limbs were broken, fused with the legs of the chair, as if she had conformed to the convulsing, rapid aging of my vicinity. Shooting down my spinal column and back up my brain stem, another feeling overwhelmed my pity for the crumpled shape. That same projection of malice hit me like a runaway semi. In my investigation of the building's interior, I had failed to keep tabs on my surroundings. With an almighty crunch from behind, I was sent hurtling into the perimeter wall of the building. A pain so unbearably hot welled up like a geyser from my right thigh and lower leg as I instinctively gripped it to soften the throb. Rapidly blinking through tear-covered eyes, I saw the balding man. He too had aged as the building around us had, looking near 90 in contrast to his previous middle-aged appearance. His wrinkled skin and frail appendages were a vast inverse from the force he'd just applied to my now battered leg. His slender frame lunged forward again, all whilst that venomous glare persisted. In my foresight, or perhaps just blind luck, I rolled to my left, only just dodging his leap, and attempted to clamber back to my feet. The pain in my leg was agonizing, but worse was the lack of feeling in my ankle and foot. In the way you get pins and needles after a limb falls asleep, I could tell my foot was making contact with the ground, but I could in no way control it. It dragged uselessly. Limping to my feet, I dragged my crippled body to the only safe place left, my truck, all the whilst that man followed suit. He never spoke, didn't even groan, just pursued like a starving, ancient predator that had finally cornered its prey. Throwing myself in and hitting the gas with all the force I could muster through that twisted limb, the vehicle sputtered off the overgrown drive and back onto the road. Evidently, I'd caught some glass on my frantic exit. At least one of my tires was punctured as my body felt each jarring bump. I just have to hope our damaged frames could hold out. I'm beat. I don't know if it's the blood loss from my leg or just the cumulative effect of traversing this accursed road for what feels like half an eternity. I've done what I can to crudely bandage my ankle with strips torn from my shirt, and though I'm no doctor, it looks and feels like an open fracture, if not a clean break. My vehicle is in a bad way too. That falling panel and whatever debris I drove over clearly did a number on the passenger side. Coupled with that, I'm currently running on fumes, the fuel needle buried deep in the red. My eyes and leg are screaming for a moment of rest, which I fear I'm rapidly closing in on, one way or another. The truck and I stopped just before a sharp bend in the road. Through my flickering, damaged headlights, I can see the vague outline of a long, thin signpost, though the sign itself is obscured by shadow. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. Silence, absolute and terrifying, crashed down again. With my truck's battery now as dead as its fuel tank, I can see him, just down the road, illuminated faintly by the distant, wrong-colored moon that seems to hang perpetually over this place. He's a good half a mile away and is slowly, laboriously dragging himself towards me, one distorted limb at a time. The balding man, or what's left of him. And here I am, slumped in the driver's seat, listening to that poor facsimile of a human drag its broken feet across each uneven bump in the cracked asphalt. The astrolabe sits on the seat beside me, its brass cool under my trembling fingers. With my ankle, what good would running do? I'd only end up back at that all-too-familiar sign, signaling another agonizing lap of these cursed lanes. I don't know what he wants, but just like the other two mindless husks I encountered, some part of me knows he's nothing but a puppet, strings pulled by the road itself, or whatever intelligence resides within its repeating loops. That astrolabe I found, it got some use after all, if only as a paperweight for my despair. But as the figure outside draws closer, its breath rattling like stones in a tin can, I pick it up. The dials, usually spinning freely, are now locked, pointing, not north, not to any constellation I recognize, pointing off the road into the impenetrable darkness of the desert scrub. If you find this vehicle, this tarnished brass instrument lying in the discarded remnants of my journey, vacantly leaning off an unassuming road that isn't on any map, try not to make the same mistake I did. Don't stop. Don't engage. Don't try to understand the tune the road hums. Or, if not, maybe you'll see me at the next oasis stop, scanning the coolers, forever deliberating over 2 drinks, my reflection blinking back when I don't. Just another thrall tethered to this everlasting road, searching, desperately, for an exit unattainable. Unless this astrolabe isn't just pointing. Maybe it's offering a path. One last, desperate turn. This needs writing down. Not sure if it's a sanity check or a warning flare. Both, maybe. The rhythmic tap of keys is grounding, makes the shaking in my fingers less obvious. Doctors suggest stress, complex grief patterns, but they didn't feel that impossibly cold touch. Didn't smell the cloying scent of lilies that sometimes fills my apartment for no reason. It started about 3 weeks after the funeral. My mother, Eleanor, lived overseas, a 12-hour time difference away. We spoke weekly, video calls mostly. So, a call from her number popping up on my phone one cold Monday afternoon wasn't inherently strange, except it was the middle of her night, and I was deep in a complex translation project deadline. I'm a freelance translator. Odd hours are normal for me, but not usually for her calls to me. I answered, expecting maybe confusion, perhaps bad news relayed by my brother Mark, who lived near her. Instead, I heard her familiar, calm voice, sounding wide awake and cheerful. "Liam, darling, just checking in. How's the project going?" Through me. "Mom? It's like 3 a.m. your time. Is everything okay?" "Perfectly fine, dear," she chirped. "Just tidying up. Say, that new art print you hung in the hallway looks lovely. Really ties the space together." I froze. I had hung a new print just that morning. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. My webcam wasn't on. How could she possibly know? Thanks, Mom. Look, I'm kind of swamped right now. Can I call you back later?" "Of course, dear," she said brightly. "Just wanted to say I'm glad you finally fixed that dripping tap in the kitchen. Much quieter now." Before I could question how she knew about the tap I'd fixed yesterday, she'd hung up. I stared at the phone, a cold unease settling in my stomach. Throughout the day, the conversation replayed in my mind. It wasn't just odd, it felt impossible. After work, I called her back. Again, she answered instantly, sounding perfectly normal, asking about my day. The comments from earlier were burning a hole in my brain. "Mom," I started hesitantly. "What did you mean earlier? About the print? The kitchen tap?" A light laugh came down the line. "Oh, just things I noticed when I popped by, dear. You looked like you were concentrating so hard earlier. Glad you took a break. Pop by? Mom, you live thousands of miles away." Her voice took on a genuinely confused tone. "Don't be silly, Liam. I tucked you in last night, didn't I? Kissed your forehead." My breath caught. I asked if she was joking, if maybe she was confused about the time difference, mixing up days. Her responses sounded equally bewildered by my confusion. My mother wasn't young. Early onset Alzheimer's ran on her side of the family. A sickening wave of worry washed over me. Maybe this was it starting? I didn't want to upset her further, start an argument over the phone. I steered the conversation back to her day, managed a relatively normal chat despite the icy dread coiling inside me, and hung up. Immediately, I messaged my brother Mark, asking him to check on her, explaining the bizarre conversation. His reply came an hour later. "Just had coffee with Mom. She's perfectly fine, sharp as ever. Asked about your translation project. Said you sounded stressed on the phone. Ever since that day, it feels like I'm untethered from reality. Small things at first, things easily dismissed. Books pulled from my shelves and left open to specific pages I hadn't read. The thermostat consistently reset overnight to 68 degrees, the exact temperature Mom always kept her house, even though I prefer it much cooler. My coffee mugs, washed and put away not in my usual haphazard manner, but stacked precisely the way Mom always did. Coincidence? Me being forgetful? Stress? Possible. Plausible. Until the sounds started. Late at night, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning, I'd hear faint music. Not humming this time, but the distinct melody of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece Mom used to play on the piano constantly, the one she played the day before the diagnosis came back terminal. It sounded distant, muffled, seemingly drifting from the living room area just outside my bedroom door. The first time I thought it was a neighbor, but the sound was too specific, too tied to her. I crept out, checked the living room. Silent. Empty. My own stereo system was off. I checked the windows, all closed. The music faded as soon as I entered the room. It happened again a few nights later. This time, I froze in my bedroom doorway, listening. The faint piano notes hung in the air. I didn't move, didn't breathe loudly. Eventually, the music faded away on its own. But the closet door across the room, the one I always leave slightly ajar because I hate closed closet doors at night, it was shut tight. I started recording my phone calls with Mom, desperate for some clue, some flicker of the confusion she displayed initially, some hint of the illness I feared. But the recordings were useless. Her voice was clear, cheerful, normal, perhaps too normal. Playing them back, I realized something deeply unsettling. There was absolutely no background noise on her end. None. No traffic sounds, no ticking clock, no clinking teacup, which was always present when she called from her kitchen. Just her voice in a perfect, sterile silence. And her comments remained subtly impossible. Glad you got those reports finished. You looked exhausted working on them. That new desk chair seems much more comfortable for your back. I hadn't told her about the reports or the chair. And yet, just before she hung up on our last recorded call, after a normal-sounding conversation, she added brightly, "Recording again, Liam? It's rather impolite, don't you think?" Paranoia became my constant companion. I started sleeping on the couch in the living room, unable to bear the bedroom where the music whispered and closet doors shut themselves. But every morning, without fail, I would wake up back in my own bed, covers neatly tucked around me, exactly the way Mom used to do when I was sick as a child. I had no memory of moving. Last night, I fought sleep as long as I could. Armed with coffee and sheer terror, I sat on the couch, determined to stay awake, to catch whatever. It was in the act. I must have dozed off eventually. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up, not suddenly, but with a heavy awareness of presence. I was in my bed again, tucked in tightly, and I remember the hand pulling the blanket up to my chin. It wasn't my mother's hand. It felt impossibly cold, thin, the skin like dry parchment over sharp bones. The fingers were too long, joints clicking softly as they adjusted the blanket. When those cold fingertips brushed my forehead, there was no maternal warmth, just a detached, clinical pressure, like something was taking a measurement, memorizing the shape of my skull. I squeezed my eyes shut, feigning sleep, rigid with terror. I thought if I didn't acknowledge it, it might leave, but I knew it knew I was awake. I could feel its awareness like static electricity. It leaned closer over the bed. I could feel the subtle shift of weight on the mattress beside me. Could hear a soft, wet sound, like thick, viscous fluid parting. Something dragged lightly across my cheek or not fingers. Softer, frayed, like dry, brittle hair. Smelled wrong, faintly sweet, like lilies on the verge of rot, mixed with damp earth. Then it spoke, or tried to. So, quiet now. The voice was a horrifying parody of my mother's. Pitch and cadence were almost right, but the words were broken, halting, slurred, like a machine struggling with pronunciation. And underneath that struggling imitation, another sound, a low, wet, labored breathing, like damaged lungs trying to draw air. It sounded hungry. That broke me. I snapped my eyes open. There was nothing there. The space beside me on the bed was empty, but the indentation on the mattress was fresh, deep, and smeared on the pillowcase next to mine was a single, wilting white lily, leaving behind a faint brownish stain. I scrambled out of bed, backing away, staring at the indentation, at the flower. Then my eyes were drawn to the large antique mirror hanging on the opposite wall. At first, I saw only my own reflection, pale, terrified. Then, behind my reflection, something else resolved in the mirror's depths. Sitting on the edge of the bed I had just vacated, it was a figure composed of swirling, coalescing gray mist or smoke, vaguely humanoid in shape but lacking defined edges. Its movements were fluid, unnatural. Where eyes should be, there were only two dull, smooth, obsidian-like stones reflecting no light. It raised one smoky arm, long and thin, towards the pillow, towards the wilting lily. Then it looked up, not at the bed, at the mirror, directly at me. His featureless face swirled. A dark slash appeared within the smoke, stretching impossibly wide, mimicking a smile. I stumbled back further, heart pounding, unable to breathe. The figure in the mirror tilted its smoky head, a gesture of mock curiosity. Then, slowly, deliberately, it raised one insubstantial hand and waved. A slow, languid wave. I ripped my gaze away from the mirror, turned, ready to flee the room. When I risked a glance back at the mirror seconds later, the figure was gone. The bed was empty again, just rumpled blankets and the single, wilting lily leaving its stain on the pillow. I stood there, shaking, the silence deafening. Then, my phone, sitting on the nightstand, vibrated silently, lighting up the screen. A new text message, from my mother's number. I hesitated for a long time before looking. When I finally did, the message contained only two items. First, a photograph, taken from inside my bedroom, looking towards the bed where I had been lying just moments before. In the photo, the smoky figure was visible, sitting on the edge of the mattress, waving towards the mirror where my reflection would have been. Second, a single line of text beneath the photo. She wanted you to know she's resting peacefully now. I've drifted long enough to know that roads sometimes hum back at you. Not the engine, not the tires singing on asphalt. The road itself, like it absorbs memories, holding on to the vibrations of everyone who's passed through. I live way out, middle of nowhere, nobody for miles. Just an old off-grid camper and a rusted-out pickup slowly becoming one with the salt-blasted earth on this forgotten stretch of northern coast. Nothing around but coarse dune grass, stunted pines twisted by the wind, and the endless gray sigh of the ocean. My job, such as it is at the small fish market and general store back in Port Blossom, the nearest village, though village is generous. It's about an hour and 40 minutes walk along the cliff path and a stretch of windswept highway just to get there. A bike would help, but cash is tight out here. I washed up in Port Blossom maybe a year ago, intending to pass through, but got stuck longer than planned. Folks were wary but decent enough. Old Man Hemlock, who ran the market, let me park my derelict camper on a patch of his unused land overlooking the sea. Said the truck I used to haul it died the day I arrived. Never had the funds to fix it or move on. Didn't mind much initially. It was a quiet place, salt air, steady rhythm of the tides. But no matter how quiet a place is, sometimes strange currents bring things ashore. It started weirder than anything I could rightly describe. Boss Hemlock started stocking this new produce. Found it himself, he said. Washed up below the high tide line after a big offshore storm, down near Black Rock Cove where nobody usually goes. It wasn't fish, wasn't shellfish. Looked like some kind of sea kelp, but a deep, vibrant purple, almost phosphorescent, with thick, fleshy leaves that felt unnervingly heavy and cool, even in the sun. Sea bounty, this is, Hemlock declared, his eyes gleaming with unusual excitement. Found it down by the cove. Tastes interesting. Gonna make us famous. No tides ever brought kelp like that this far up, boss. I told him, poking a fleshy leaf. Felt cool, almost slick. And nothing grows purple like that around here. Well, this stuff says otherwise, he chuckled, holding up a piece that seemed to pulse faintly with its own inner light. Magic kelp, maybe? It wasn't magic. Not the good kind, anyway. It looked unhealthy, but he insisted on selling it cheap, calling it deep kelp. Said it was packed with nutrients. He was right about two things. It brought attention, and it turned our quiet village into something else entirely. Both for the worse. At first, the novelty brought folks in. Curious tourists passing through, people from the inland towns hearing about the strange purple sea vegetable. The market bustled like never before. Money flowed. Hemlock gave me a raise, a decent one too. For a month or two, things looked up. I started thinking maybe I could finally save enough to fix the truck. Move on. But the people who ate the deep kelp, they started changing. It began subtly. A slight bloating around the face, skin taking on a faint purplish, almost translucent sheen. They always seemed damp, like they'd just come in from the sea mist, even on clear days. Their voices grew softer, huskier, with a sibilant whisper underneath, and they craved more kelp. The initial tourist curiosity faded, replaced by an obsessive local demand. People stopped buying much else. They'd hang around the market, waiting for Hemlock to bring in a fresh haul from the cove. The friendliest old woman in town, Mrs. Gable, who used to bake pies for everyone. I saw her one afternoon furtively gathering discarded outer leaves of the kelp from the market's refuse bin, stuffing them into her pockets with trembling hands. It was sad and deeply unsettling, watching these decent people consumed by this strange new hunger. I stopped seeing much of Hemlock himself outside his cramped back office. He became reclusive. A constant damp patch spread on the floor outside his office door, smelling strongly of brine and something else, something like decay. You could hear odd, wet, gurgling sounds from inside sometimes. Late at night, when I stayed to clean up, I'd see him emerge briefly, usually bundled in heavy oilskins despite the season, grab armfuls of the deep kelp from the dwindling stock, and disappear back into his office. I don't think he went home much anymore. Eventually, deep kelp was the only thing we stocked. Hemlock found more and more down at the cove, dragging it back in heavy sacks. His own skin now having that same purple, translucent quality as the regular eaters. The town changed too. People moved slower, seemed heavier, always damp. Their conversations became whispers, focused only on the kelp. The damp patch outside Hemlock's office grew, covering the market floor in a thin, cold film of seawater that never dried, no matter how much I mopped. It seeped constantly from under his door. One afternoon, realizing we were genuinely running low on stock and knowing I had to face him, I knocked on his office door. Even the wood felt damp, saturated. Water splashed my hand as I knocked. It was unnaturally cold. "Come in," a gurgling voice answered. Pushing the door open released a small wave of frigid, briny water onto my boots. The water inside the office was ankle deep, and the source wasn't a leak in the pipes. It was Hemlock himself. Words failed me. I stood stunned, staring. He sat behind his desk, which seemed half-submerged, looking monstrous. Bloated purple, his skin stretched tight and glistening wetly. Water constantly weeped from his pores, from the corners of his eyes, dribbling from his mouth as he spoke. He looked like a drowned man somehow reanimated. "What is it, son?" He gurgled, water splashing with each word. We're low on the kelp, Boss Hemlock," I stammered, inventing the first excuse that came to mind. We weren't that low yet. He lumbered to his feet, water sloshing around him. He surveyed the main store area, poking at the kelp piles with a waterlogged finger. His body seemed to ripple slightly, like a water balloon when poked. "You're right. Need more. Won't last the night." He spread his arms wide, the skin under them loose and flapping. Tiny droplets sprayed from bumps on his arms. It was high summer, warm outside, but Hemlock started pulling on layers of heavy oilskins and waterproof gear, already soaked through. He sloshed out the back door towards the path leading down to Black Rock Cove. "Keep an eye on things," he gurgled back at me. "I've seen enough horror movies. You don't follow the transformed boss into the mysterious cove." I locked up the market early, my hands shaking, and started the long walk back to my camper, the setting sun painting the sky in lurid shades of purple and orange. The next morning, stepping out of my camper, I knew something was wrong before I even saw it. The ground wasn't just damp. It was saturated. Puddles everywhere, despite no rain overnight. The air was thick with an unnaturally dense, cold sea fog that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. It clung heavily, muffling sound, visibility down to maybe 20 feet. And the smell, brine and decay, overwhelming now. Starting down the path towards the highway, the ground became slick, coated in a thin layer of purple-tinged slime. As I neared the highway junction where the town turnoff should be, the fog grew even thicker. I couldn't see the road sign. I walked further, expecting to see the first houses of Port Blossom emerge from the mist. Nothing, just impenetrable gray fog and the slick, slimy ground underfoot. The highway itself seemed coated in the stuff. I turned towards where the village should be, pushing into the fog. It resisted, thick and cold, clinging like wet cobwebs. After a few yards, I stumbled over something hidden in the mist, a mailbox, tilted on its post, completely covered in pulsing, purple slime. Further on, a child's tricycle similarly encased. The entire village was gone, or rather, consumed, swallowed by the fog and whatever grew within it. There were no buildings visible, no sounds except my own ragged breathing and the faint, distant sigh of the real ocean. Everything was coated in that thick, living, purple slime that seemed to pulse faintly in the gray light. I backed away slowly, then turned and ran back up the highway, away from the silent, fog-shrouded, slime-coated place where Port Blossom used to be. The fog seemed to press at my back, reluctant to let me go, until finally I broke free into clearer air miles up the road. I didn't look back. I just kept walking south, away from the coast, away from the sea. I don't know what happened to the people, to Hemlock. I don't know what the deep kelp really was, or what ancient current brought it ashore. Maybe it was preparing the way for something else from that abyss I glimpsed in my panic. I'm just a drifter again now, looking for the next town, the next temporary job. Somewhere far inland this time, somewhere dry. But sometimes, when the air is damp, or I smell salt on the wind, I feel a phantom coldness, see a flash of purple in my peripheral vision, and I wonder how far that fog, that bloom, will eventually spread. I'm just grateful I never developed a taste for seafood. Last year, before heading off to university, I needed a temporary job. Saw a notice pinned up in the campus library, evening shift assistant needed, mostly reshelving and processing returns. Sounded easy enough, quiet work. Mrs. Gable, the head librarian, a stern woman with sharp eyes behind thicker glasses, hired me on the spot after a brief chat. She also introduced me to her daughter, Cleo, who apparently helped out a few evenings a week. Cleo knows the stacks like the back of her hand, Mrs. Gable had said with a thin smile. Cleo was peculiar, petite, maybe a year or two younger than me, with unervingly large, dark eyes and movements that were sometimes slightly too quick, almost blurry at the edges. The first thing she said to me, bypassing any greeting, was, "Hey, can you hear this?" She then tilted her head, focused intently on me, and produced a faint, rapid clicking sound. It wasn't vocal. It seemed to emanate from somewhere behind her teeth, like chattering, but faster, almost insectal, all while holding a wide, slightly vacant smile. It was deeply unsettling. Cleo seemed maybe neurodivergent, or perhaps just desperate to appear quirky and interesting. I just nodded awkwardly and tried to roll with it, figuring she was attempting to break the ice in her own unique fashion. The rest of that first shift involved minimal interaction, mostly just quiet shelving. Maybe a week into the job, I discovered her hiding place. I was working in the lower basement level, the deep stacks, a maze of towering metal bookshelves. I'd gone down a particularly narrow aisle when I heard quiet giggling, muffled, seeming to come from inside the shelving unit itself. It made me jump. "Cleo?" I called out hesitantly. The giggling stopped, A panel on the side of one of the large mobile compact shelving units, the kind you move with a hand crank to create an aisle, slid open a crack. Cleo's large eyes peered out from the darkness between tightly packed rows of old periodicals. Her legs were drawn up to her chest, somehow squeezed into the impossibly narrow gap. "What are you doing in there?" I asked, annoyance mixing with unease. "I was trying to work." She was messing around. "Just checking the alignment," she replied cheerfully, her voice echoing slightly from within the compressed space. "Right? Okay. I didn't buy it. I'd seen the maintenance crew service those units just yesterday." She wriggled out with unnerving flexibility, like a contortionist, earning a startled glance from a student studying at a nearby corral. "No harm done, I supposed. Just weird." The next incident was less harmless. A few days later, a young professor came down to the deep stacks looking for some obscure journals, her young son trailing behind her, bored and restless. She didn't know how the compact shelving worked, so I was showing her how to use the crank to open the correct aisle. Her son, maybe 5 or 6, was wandering nearby. As I was explaining the locking mechanism, I heard Cleo's distinctive soft clicking sound from the next aisle over, followed by the little boy giggling. An uneasy feeling prickled my gut. Knowing Cleo's oddness, leaving a small child unsupervised near her felt irresponsible. "Excuse me, I'll be right back," I told the professor, leaving her to browse the newly opened aisle. I rounded the corner and froze. Cleo was half-crouched beside the crank mechanism of another closed shelving unit, one notoriously heavy and stiff to move. The little boy stood before it, holding a handful of shiny pebbles Cleo must have given him. Cleo was making the rapid clicking sound with her teeth, her eyes wide and fixed on the boy, head tilted in that unnervingly focused way. "What do I do now?" the boy asked excitedly. "Just turn the handle," Cleo explained slowly, her voice soft, almost hypnotic. "Turn it until the aisle opens up wide, like a secret passage." I realized with horror what she was doing. Those mobile shelves weigh hundreds, if not thousands, of pounds when fully loaded. If that child somehow managed to turn the heavy crank and open the unit while someone was inside— "Cleo!" I snapped, hurrying towards them. "But what's inside?" the boy asked, reaching for the crank.
À surprise.
Cleo chirped, her clicking intensifying slightly. I reached them just as the boy put his hand on the crank handle. I grabbed his shoulder gently. "Hey bud, these aren't toys. They can be dangerous," I said, steering him away. Cleo glared at me, the playful look vanishing instantly, replaced by cold annoyance. The boy, losing interest, scampered back towards his mother, who was engrossed in her journals, oblivious. "What did you think you were doing?" I demanded, keeping my voice low. "Just playing," Cleo shrugged, the vacant smile returning. "Chill out. He wasn't strong enough to open it anyway." I wasn't so sure. I walked away, shaken, knowing I should report this to Mrs. Gable. But later that evening, when Mrs. Gable came down to check on things, I hesitated. She was praising Cleo for meticulously reorganizing a section, beaming at her daughter with such oblivious pride. How could I explain? She wouldn't believe her daughter would endanger a child. I hadn't even gotten my first paycheck yet. I needed the money for tuition deposit. Against my better judgment, I let it slide, a decision I still regret with nauseating intensity. A few days later, Cleo and I were working the closing shift together. It was near midnight, the library deserted except for us. I was sorting returned books onto a cart when she materialized silently beside me. "Do you like me, Alex?" she asked abruptly. I frowned, avoiding her gaze, focusing on aligning book spines. "Yeah, sure, Cleo. You're fine." The lie felt clumsy, transparent. "Then why don't you ever really look at me?" I forced myself to turn, to meet her large, dark eyes. "What do you mean? Do you like me?" Her face was suddenly serious, the usual faint quirk of a smile gone. Her eyes seemed darker, deeper. There was an unnerving stillness about her. My mouth went dry. "Yes," I croaked out. "Liar." The word was soft, almost gentle, but it landed like a physical blow. I felt my awkwardness curdle into genuine fear as she started making that rapid clicking sound again. Louder this time, more rhythmic. Her eyes seemed to lock onto mine, and the periphery of my vision started to blur, like I was suddenly looking down a tunnel. I tried to step back, but my legs felt heavy, disconnected. They wouldn't obey. Instead, seemingly of their own volition, they followed her as she began to walk slowly backward, towards the rows of compact shelving units against the far wall. Panic rose in my chest. I knew where she was leading me. The clicking sound filled my head, hypnotic. Her playful, vacant smile returned as she sensed my rising fear. "Don't worry," she said, her voice seeming to echo from far away, though she was only feet from me. "It's just a quick check." Her clicking eyes never left mine as we reached one of the largest, heaviest units. Without looking away from me, she reached behind her and expertly spun the crank, opening a narrow aisle between two walls of densely packed books. She stepped sideways into the gap, then beckoned me with one hand, her movements unnaturally fluid. In my peripheral vision, her hand seemed to blur, moving faster than it should. Her head stayed perfectly fixed, eyes locked on mine, the clicking sound insistent, drilling into my brain. Once she was fully inside the narrow space, her voice echoed slightly from between the shelves. "Now close it up, nice and tight." I felt utterly powerless, like a puppet on strings. I watched, horrified, as my own hands reached out, grasped the cold metal crank handle, and began to turn it. The heavy unit groaned, moving slowly, closing the aisle, compressing the space where Cleo stood. The panic inside me was a physical pressure, making me want to retch, but my body continued its task, cranking the shelf tighter and tighter. My finger moved towards the locking lever. I desperately hoped it wouldn't engage, that the unit was too full, that something would stop it. But as Cleo softly commanded, "Lock it," the lever clicked home smoothly, sealing the unit shut. I heard the air hiss out from the compressed space within. Through the narrow vertical gap where the edges of the mobile shelves didn't quite meet, I could see her face, pale in the dim light. Her head hadn't moved an inch, despite the compressing shelves. Her wide, dark eyes stared directly into mine, unblinking. I remembered a documentary about owls, how their heads remain uncannily stable while their bodies move, fixing their prey with an unwavering gaze. Cleo's face reminded me exactly of that. Just this pale, wide-eyed face staring back at me through the gap, the clicking sound finally silent. She must have held me there like that, watching her in the compressed darkness, for a long time, maybe half an hour? I lost track. The floor seemed to vibrate slightly. Then, suddenly, the main fluorescent lights directly overhead flickered violently. Once, twice, before stabilizing. In that brief moment of flickering darkness, the connection, the compulsion, snapped. My eyes lost sight of hers. I blinked, hard, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The top halves of my eyeballs felt scraped raw as tears finally welled, blurring my vision. Suddenly in control of my own limbs again, feeling foggy and nauseous, I stumbled backward, away from the sealed shelving unit. I heard Cleo's voice call softly from within, "Alex, where are you going? Open it back up." But I wasn't falling for it again. My brain felt scrambled, my legs unsteady. For a terrifying second, I thought about trying to reverse the crank, but realized it was locked tight now. And besides, did I really want to release whatever Cleo truly was? Whatever she was, it wasn't human. I dreaded to think what she had planned next, had the lights not flickered. I half ran, half stumbled past Mrs. Gable's darkened office door, praying she wouldn't emerge. Thankfully, it remained shut. I fumbled with the keys at the main staff exit, burst out into the cool night air, and didn't look back. I never returned, never picked up my final paycheck. When my parents asked why I'd quit so abruptly, I mumbled something about needing more time to study, an excuse they readily accepted. A few weeks ago, haunted by the memory, needing some kind of closure or proof I hadn't imagined at all, I finally mustered the courage to check the university library's website. They had live webcam feeds for some sections, mainly for security monitoring. I found the link for the basement archive feed. The low-resolution image showed the familiar rows of shelving units in the dim light. I navigated the clumsy online controls, panning the camera view slowly, until I found it the heavy compact shelving unit I'd sealed Cleo inside. My breath hitched. I zoomed in as much as the feed allowed. The gap between the shelves was barely visible. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A pale shape within the gap. A face, staring directly, unblinkingly, back at the webcam lens. Wide, dark eyes in a pale face. Cleo, utterly still, waiting. I slammed my laptop shut, heart pounding, feeling sick. It hadn't been a hallucination. She was still in there. Or, at least, her face was still staring out from that compressed, book-lined prison. I haven't been able to use the library since. Every time I see rows of shelves, I see her face staring back at me from the shadows between the books.